Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new season of Conversations with Tim. I've been away for a while. I'm happy to be back, and I'm excited to have Tanya Larose join me today. She is a realtor with Royal LePage Varsity in Saskatoon, and she's also the chairperson for Crystal's Gift. Welcome, Tanya.
Thanks for having me, Tim, and thank you for that kind introduction.
You're welcome. So, let's get started here. How did you get into the real estate business?
I wish I had a fancy story to tell you, but I don't. And it might be similar to others who have gotten into the real estate industry, but I was inspired by a friend. In my mid-20s, a friend of mine got into the industry. We had both previously worked at SaskTel, and she really enjoyed it. And she said, things were going well. So when just the place I was at in my life, I was very restless and, almost like I'm a very intuitive person. I'm a very empathetic person. And, I go by energies and vibes and whatnot. And I just knew that there was something else that I needed to do with my life. And I just sort of went with it. I jumped in with both feet. Thank goodness. I had some financial support from my husband at the time. Otherwise, we all know the first year in real estate can be severely daunting, but I pushed through. Absolutely. And here I am today.
That's good. Was it a tough decision going from, you mentioned you were with SaskTel, so you had a government job, government salary, government pension, benefits, all that stuff. Was it a tough decision for you?
You know what? Not really, because it was just something, not to sound corny or anything, but I was just following my heart. Even with SaskTel, it was very unfulfilling. It just didn't feel like a good fit. Obviously, in long term, they're an excellent employer, but it takes a special kind of person to be a realtor. With the crazy hours and being able to wear all the different hats that are required, to please our clients, please the general public, to abide by our bylaws and regulations, our code of ethics, all while maintaining a family life if you do have children or a spouse. And then if you go even further and you have a passion for philanthropy, you'll be spread very thinly. So it definitely takes a unique personality and individual to stick in the industry.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that all too well. You mentioned earlier that, the first year, especially in real estate, is always tough. So what motivates you to keep going? What motivated you to keep going, to push through that beginning parts of your business? Because it's like that with most businesses. The first couple of years are always tougher, and then you just gotta keep pushing through. But if you can push through, you start to see the results of your labor, right? So what motivates you to keep going?
Absolutely. Yeah. The first part is like a famine, and then you start getting to the gravy and then the meat and potatoes. And if you stick through it, it's awesome. But my motivation, obviously, number one, my son. He's 9 years old. From day one, I always knew that I wanted to be, the best version of myself, so that he could observe that, he could grow with it, and his quality of life would be far elevated than what I experienced, at his age, and then which will progress into adulthood, right? If I wasn't a mother, I wouldn't doubt if my life would be possibly somewhat different at this point, because you need something of serious substance to motivate you to choose to create a business, to stick with that business through all of the trials and tribulations. So if your why, that reason is not strong enough, then it's not going to be enough to push you through those obstacles.
That makes sense. Being, like you said, being a mother and starting a new business, how do you balance that business and that family life that you need to balance? Because your son will have been probably 2 years old or almost 2 years old at the time when you started. And we know this business has long hours and weird hours and things like that. How do you balance it?
Well, luckily, when I first got into the business, I was still married at the time. And a lot of the time, my husband and I would just juggle our son because he as well is an entrepreneur and he owns a construction company. So again, that's a form of support, right? And you always need that support in every element. And especially when it comes to your children, you know, that's not something you take lightly, and you want to still, like, 10 years down the road, you don't want to look back and say, oh, I sacrificed years of their life that should have been treasured, and,
That's true.
you know, sacrificed it for the sake of my business. So I've always been very vigilant of that too. You know, those young years, they're so precious, and you're not going to get them back. So
No,
yeah, so keeping that in the forefront of my mind allowed me to balance being a mother as well as growing my business.
that definitely makes a lot of sense because, like you said, your why, your motivation is your son, but you also have to balance that drive for success with spending time with your son and your family and keeping that family life wholesome as well. So it's definitely a juggling act, and more than likely takes a lot of organization and having a system in place. Now, would you say as a business owner, as someone in business, would you say that there's a particular, say, systems that you've put in place that has helped you be successful? Because in the past, I've always talked about every business having systems in place, having processes in place, because then it keeps you focused and things like that. Do you do stuff like that? And what has been, I guess, your secret to success?
Secret? I don't know if it's a secret, more just a relentless drive and daily hustle. You know, like as soon as I wake up in the morning, I'm automatically thinking business. And as you know, we could be negotiating right up until midnight if we've
Yeah,
got a live deal. So at this point, where I am at right now with my business is a result from sticking to the processes that you mentioned at the very beginning of my career and developing them into a habit, right? And then our habits
yeah,
create our current circumstances, our character, and then our character creates our reputation, and our reputation essentially is what draws in business. And that's what we call
that's
the
true.
gravy, right? Where the gravy is the referrals. That's when the people start coming to us, right? When we don't have to claw tooth and nail to get
That's
those
true.
clients like you do at the beginning. That would be definitely my key to success, is following that sequence of developing habits that create your character, and your character will create your reputation. In terms of what those habits are, even if I did, you know, break down each and every one of them like to the detail, I don't think it would be really applicable to every one of your listeners, because everybody's lifestyle is different. And that's one of
Hmm.
the, let's call a spade a spade. One of the reasons all of us entrepreneurs got into the business is to be our own boss and set
Yeah,
our own rules. So we set those rules according to our lifestyle, according to our long-term goals, our short-term goals, and our personal values, you know, like a portion of those habits we discussed and the characteristic, or the character and the reputation, is philanthropy. Like
hmm,
for me, it's always been very important, just the way I was brought up, giving back. I mean, really, the way I was brought up, if you're doing well, then you should be giving back. There's no
hmm.
excuse, there's no ifs, ands, and buts. So for me, that's just second nature. And that's obviously part of why I created Crystal's Gift. And it's also why I make the time to volunteer
Hmm.
to sit on the board at Waterskill and Heritage Park, as well as CNYC, which is the Core Neighborhood Youth Co-op downtown
Yeah,
Saskatoon. And you know, those volunteer items, they take up a lot of time,
hmm.
but that's time I think is necessary, you know. And I don't like to be a judgmental person, but
Yeah.
when I do see a professional that is, you know, not giving back in any capacity, I'm sorry, but I have no respect for you.
Being a professional, being a business owner, being an entrepreneur, we always tell people to support us, right? And when you get to a certain level, you have to start spreading that support to others as well. You have to start giving back. You have to start whether it's monetary give back, whether it's your time giving back, whether it's sharing your knowledge with other people. I think that is definitely an important part of being human and also being a professional or an entrepreneur. Uh, would you say that in your business, there's been challenges that you've faced being a woman in business? Has there been certain challenges that are unique to that?
Absolutely. Like the average realtor is a man.
Mm,
And then further to that, I mean, any person in business knows the inequalities when it comes to the genders.
that's true.
You can just pull up the statistics and see severe pay inequities and whatnot in a myriad of industries,
That's true.
both lucrative and not so lucrative. But being in the front line, all of this is not unfounded. I mean, to put a visual on it, I would say it'd be like running a race with one leg instead of two. And that may sound drastic, but it really is. I mean, when you're a woman, and especially depending on who you're dealing with, a lot of people don't take you quite as seriously. If they have the traditional value or perspective that a woman should be at home with the
Mm,
kids and whatnot, or a woman is not as assertive enough to take on negotiations or whatnot, which, I mean, at one point in our history that may have been the case, but I'm not sure if that type of person really realizes where we are as a society, and all of the factors that go into that, like technology,
yeah.
the family picture as a whole. It used to be one person working, it used to be the man working, and now the majority of the time you see both the man and one woman working.
Yeah.
So I think public views on men and women have come a long way. So it's not as socially acceptable to discriminate against a woman. However, there's still those underlying discrepancies that if somebody can either knowingly or subconsciously downgrade a female just because of her gender, it still happens. And even, within the industry is unacceptable, regardless of the profession, regardless of the business. And of course, I'm sure this happens in many, many industries.
You mentioned a few challenges there. The perception of how people treat women in business, the perception that they're not quite as good as the male counterparts in business, things like that. How do you fight through those challenges? Like how do you stay positive? Because that could be a negative force to women in business. How do you remain positive? How do you remain resilient enough to keep
Mm-hmm.
going in the business?
Well, there's a couple elements to that. For one thing, taking a step back and looking at the macro view of where we are historically for women and women's rights, and where we're at a bit of a turning point, and it's excellent, and it's a very exciting for our next generation, because depending on what we do, the women right now do collectively, there may be a generation past us or the next generation past them where there is no inequality. In a perfect world, right? We can only hope for them. We can only take the steps, which are our responsibility as the females of today, to sort of pave the way to eradicate what's happening that shouldn't be happening. And for me, right now, in my opinion, I believe that just continuing to prove all of the inequalities are wrong. And for example, like a woman can't negotiate properly. Hey, I just saved my client $40,000 on purchase price. Don't tell me a woman can't negotiate. So it's a matter of going above and beyond, every single time in every single aspect. And that is just to prove that there's no time you can compare me to a man, that he's going to have the upper hand just because he's a man. And that's similar to what I've heard from other females. We just have to go to the nth degree to demolish all of those gender-based negative stereotypes, you know. And it is unfortunate because if you look at it objectively, and even if you do like a test study objectively,
Yeah.
and you compare the activities of a female and a male, you would more than likely see that a male can get away with being a little bit more lax, whereas a woman is wouldn't be able to get away with you know, such activities, whatever that activity would be. I mean, it varies from, you know, industry to industry, but yeah, that would be the primary just responsibility, I think, that falls upon all business women in this generation.
You know, as you were talking and explaining that, you know, as a woman in business, you have to do just a little bit more. You have to do a little bit more just to kind of prove yourself and put yourself on even levels as your male counterparts. It kind of reminds me of kind of what it's like being a Black person in a predominantly Caucasian world, right? Like you feel like you have to do a little bit more. You have to prove yourself just to be on the same level. You know, yourself as a Métis woman business owner of First Nations, are you finding those same challenges too, even from that perspective?
Oh, absolutely. And I know that's probably one of the reasons you and I have, well, I've felt connected to you and been able to bond so well with you, Tim, is, you know, certain things you'll never really know unless you've experienced them firsthand. And I've definitely experienced racism firsthand, you know, all through my childhood. I mean, it wasn't like every day incessantly, but
yeah,
I mean, it happens, right? And then to jump into the business world, it still happens. It doesn't happen directly to my face or directly like derogatory remarks, but I like being in the setting, you are pertinent to certain discussions where you hear, you know, very racist remarks. And it's almost to the point like, it's like, I'm sitting right here, you know, when they're having these kind of discussions.
Yeah.
But so that's one element. Obviously, other professionals, you know, and I think there's a fine line between biting your tongue and speaking what's right, you know, because as a professional, you know, we don't want to burn bridges for the sake of our own, you know, income and the good of our business. But we also have, as you mentioned earlier, Tim, the human aspect. We have a level to maintain for the good of humanity, basically, you know.
Yeah.
And silence is often compliance, you know. So I guess that too is a case-by-case basis, you know, in the professional world as a business person or an entrepreneur, really picking and choosing your battles. Realistically, if you decide to put on that vest that says I'm taking on the onus of fighting all racism in business, I'm sorry, but it's going to be a losing battle. Like, we can contribute to the cause, but you know what? One person changing an entire viewpoint that has been developed over, you know, centuries is unrealistic. Just staying true to your own values, your own, I guess, perception of, and your own standard of, you know what, like, let's not get out of hand with the racism. Like, if you insist on having those views, maybe we just distance ourselves professionally, you know? And then in terms of, so that covers the racism on a business peer level, talking about a racism or even just, you know, barriers that a minority may experience with the consumer or clientele. I would say definitely that is there as well. It's there in a very unique way though. And probably for me, it makes it even more unique because I've been told and through my business activities and even personal activities that I have a very ambiguous look to me. So a lot of the times people will see me and they won't know what I am, but they know I'm not white. You know? Have I been overlooked because of the color of my skin? I would say probably without a shadow of a doubt, yes, at one point or another. But you know what? On the flip side of that coin, we can always, I mean, 99% of the time, you can change what appears to be a negative into a positive. Like
Absolutely.
for me, I gathered all the feedback I was getting, and I said, hey, if my appearance is so ambiguous, you know, I can capitalize on these other demographics. You know, I may lose out to a couple, you know, a certain clientele, but there's a wide variety of cultures that evidently would accept me as their own. You know, like I've had a few people think I was Filipino. Actually, just the other day, somebody thought I was visiting in from Hawaii. and I have had, you know, are you part Black? Are you part Chinese? You'd be surprised, and people are always very brazen in asking the questions, and I'm a pretty easygoing person, so I don't get offended.
Do you often give that response of no, I'm not part of anything, I'm just human?
Yeah, I love that, Tim, and I have said that. I usually say that after I've had a long day at the office, because I just don't have the time or energy to, you know, do the politically correct response.
No,
and then
sure.
or sometimes you follow it up with, oh, okay, then what are you?
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Yeah.
Going back to turning that negative into a positive is, although I may not be able to appeal, like I said, to a certain demographic, I can appeal to all of these other demographics, and that's exactly what I have done. I've capitalized on my ambiguous appearance to connect with a wide variety of ethnic appearing people.
Yeah. You know, when as you were talking, I was thinking too, like even just from a purely business perspective, I think one of the things that people forget is figuring out who their audience is, and also figuring out who their target market is, right? So, and from
Absolutely.
you've used your experience to figure out who your target market is and who your audience is, who you resonate better with, right? I mean, in Canada, as I look at Canada in general, like I feel that like the group that truly experiences the most racism are the Aboriginal people. And
Oh, wow.
I don't truly know how we as a society could help. I know there's racism, like as a Black person, I experience it, racism, but I just feel like Aboriginal people, especially in Canada, experience it the most. And that's been a barrier in business, that's been a barrier in career for them, that's been a barrier in equality, that's been a barrier in general. So like how do we as a society, like how do we change this? Like it's been a question that I ask myself all the time. I'm going to ask you, maybe you have an answer because I don't have an answer for it. Like, how do we truly change that?
Yeah. Well, let me just start off by saying, you know, it is absolutely heartbreaking that that is what you see, because it just reaffirms that the reality of how obvious it is, and how while it is so obvious, people still continue to refuse to acknowledge it, refuse to make better choices in terms of how they treat the Aboriginal community, things like that. You know, it's because if it's that obvious, where you as a Black man can see the intense amount of racism, then that is just extreme. It makes one think, well, then what does need to happen in order for this to turn around, you know? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but you know, the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic in Canada could arguably be compared to, you know, the high rate of Black people being killed in the United States. And I say that because it just keeps happening, and it just, nobody gets punished, and therefore it'll keep happening. And
Absolutely.
and these are people's children, these are people's parents, their siblings, you know. And it's just such a huge devalue of life that it's sickening, it's heartbreaking, but to shine a bit of light and hope, because I definitely believe there's hope. Yeah, there are things that can be done from the non-Indigenous community, definitely. And before we dive into that, I also want to just point out the Indigenous community gets a lot of backlash because of the socioeconomic issues that they're facing, poverty. Canada is currently fighting a First Nation housing crisis. In the housing continuing model, it starts with homelessness and it ends with home ownership. And right now, within the Indigenous community, there's an active effort and many, I guess, support systems to bring the large amount of homeless Indigenous people up into that continuum.
Okay.
It's obviously not going to happen overnight, and there's a reason why they are where they are. Whether people like to admit it or not, Canada almost, completed a genocide on First Nation people. There was the smallpox that almost wiped the people out. Battles and whatnot. And then confined them to reserves and took away their culture, took away their freedoms. I mean, it wasn't until just the 80s, a lot of us were already alive, and Indigenous people weren't allowed to vote, for goodness sake. So really, I mean, Indigenous people should get a pat on the back for still being up and running in general. Like, we may have some, like, for example, the addictions that a lot of people complain about, like the drug addicts and the people dealing with addictions in downtown Saskatoon, and they say, "Oh, get them out of our city." But you know what? That's too bad that some people take that stance, is because that's usually the same demographic that created the problem. Like, there's that movie, and I stressed everybody to watch it. I think it's about the Indigenous hockey player, where he was put into a residential school and he was raped and abused by the male teachers there or whatever for a good decade. And when he got out, he was an amazing, like, one of the best hockey players in Canada. And he never followed through because he was just so crippled by all those years of abuse. Rightfully so. And many of us would experience that.
The trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So he fell into addiction, and that is a tale as old as time. So if anybody ever wonders or feels so inclined to judge, a First Nation or Métis person with addiction problems, that didn't happen overnight. That's generations, and then you see sometimes people saying, well, they need to teach their kids. Oh, when was the opportunity to gain those life lessons of, teaching economics, how to financial literacy, etc. When the government pushed all the Indigenous people onto reserve. So, well, we're not here for a history lesson.
No, understandable.
Yeah, but back to how the non-Indigenous community can work together collectively to change the direction of that. I would say that exactly what you're doing, Tim, is acknowledging it, and not putting a veil over it, not downplaying it, not putting your own personal twist on it because you don't want to feel as bad, or personally like a villain or whatnot, and just speaking about it matter of factly. I'm sure a lot of your viewers are business people. Looking at it objectively like a business, certain things need to be done to change a trajectory. Speak up. Like, if you are non-Indigenous and you overhear another non-Indigenous person saying racist remarks, speak up, because oftentimes it takes another non-Indigenous person to call out a non-Indigenous person, because they won't take a Indigenous person seriously where they would take somebody of a similar culture more seriously, because it's like it's psychology, and when we all know this being in business, when you can identify with another person, whether it be with similar values, similar characteristics,
Yeah.
heck, similar, hand gestures, when we mirror our clients, that's a way of connecting with them. So when you can connect with somebody and you hear them saying things that are far outdated and perpetuating that deep driven racism for the Indigenous community, speak up. There's actually, I got to give props. There's a number of realtors here in Saskatoon that are like that. They're vocal when it comes to, and then they're non-Indigenous, and they're vocal when it comes to settings where racist topics might come up. But other than speaking up, just practicing it in your day-to-day life, when you do encounter a Indigenous person, I guess just treat them like everybody else, like if you have viewers in the United States or in other areas, they may not really be able to see why this is such a serious matter, because we're a little bit of we're definitely statistically a smaller province, so therefore lack of diversity. Whereas in like Toronto or Vancouver, it's so beautifully diverse that nobody bats an eye at, the different cultures. And I hope and I have faith that Saskatchewan will reach that level.
Well, I definitely think that we could, because like you said, if we all start to speak up, then it doesn't make it normal anymore. Because I feel like for years and years and years, a lot of people have kept quiet, right? Like there is a lot of negative talk, racist talks and things like that when it comes to Indigenous people, and people just keep quiet and don't say anything, and then it just becomes normal. And then next thing you know, they start to say the same thing too, right? Because then it becomes normal. But we're in that cancel culture era right now, where a lot of people are speaking up. Social media has allowed the platform for a lot of people to speak up, and I truly believe that we're going to start to see change, and that we're going to start to see the next generation be less tolerant of racism, be less tolerant of even poverty, because there's been a lot of people speaking out about poverty. And also, like the next generation, I think will do a lot better than the previous generation has done with dealing with abuse and dealing with substance abuse and things like that. So, I mean, I'm very, very hopeful, like yourself, and I'm very, very optimistic that, like, if we keep talking about it and we're not quiet about it, that we will see change. But that brings me to Crystal's gift. Can you tell me a little bit about Crystal's gift?
For sure. So Crystal's gift came to me 3 years ago, and I created it in memory of my sister. She was murdered on the outskirts of Saskatoon about 20 years ago now. And I was 12 at the time, and I was very close with her. And the older I got, and as the years passed, it sat on my heart that I wanted to do something to honor her, and in memory of her, because she had the biggest heart ever. She was, she always wanted to help others, and she particularly had a soft spot for her girlfriends who were single mothers and for children in general. Her pastor at the time even reiterated all of this upon her death, and her pastor went on to create a safe home for girls at the time. So I was inspired by what the pastor had did, and I was not quite sure how I was going to commemorate her until about 3 years into my real estate career. I kept selling houses, obviously.
Yeah.
And then I kept having clients be like, "Hey, Tanya, we have this leftover furniture. Do you know where we could drop it off?" And then one day I just had this light bulb moment. I was like, I need to give this to women, and I need to create a program that will facilitate that, and that will sort of, I can just pitch it to my clients in their seller's package or their buyer's package, that it's available to them, and that when they utilize it, they're giving back to the community and back to a single mother in need. And that's the vision and the mission of Crystal's Gift, is that we take donations of gently used furniture, small household items, and then we rehome them with a single mother in need. And the purpose, obviously, to improve the quality of life for the children involved, because, you know, these children didn't ask for these circumstances in their life.
No, for sure.
A lot of the time, you know, it's a single mother leaving an abusive husband, and she has to move into an apartment. She has nothing. You know, how heartbreaking would it be, you know, if you could see this mother and her 3 children, you know, sleeping on the floor in an empty apartment, you know? So when I organized all of these thoughts that happened at that moment, I was pretty excited. Started the community outreach program. I was very busy at the time, and it didn't all come to me immediately in a cohesive manner. So I ran the program as a community outreach program for about a year. And it was very successful. The women we helped was just so grateful. This one time we were doing a drop off, and it was close to Christmas. It was gently snowing outside, and we were making a pretty good haul to a woman in an apartment building, and she had a toddler and then a young boy around 5 years old. And as we were moving things in, the 5-year-old got super excited, and he was like, "Oh, Mom, Santa's bringing us gifts."
Oh,
I know. And
awesome.
I still, like, that still makes me emotional, because it's just like, no kid should have to deal with that, you know? And
absolutely. Yeah.
And then it drives me to want to, you know, continue with it. And that's why I put in, like, as the time passed, I realized, hey, this needs to be an official nonprofit, so that we can start getting more donations and helping more people. And I took the step to officially turn it into a nonprofit about a year ago. And now we have a board. The board is comprised of a family lawyer. She runs her own law firm downtown Saskatoon, Nadu Law. So if you are looking for a lawyer and a family-oriented aspect for especially single women, she's very passionate about helping mothers and whatnot who are in a tough spot. And then we also have Kendra Weenie, who is a domestic abuse survivor. She wrote a book on her experiences. She was nearly killed by the father of her child. And now she does workshops all across Canada for female empowerment and, of course, domestic abuse. And we work on, obviously, the logistics of the business or the nonprofit, and how to grow it and how to keep it respectful to both parties. You know, the women we're helping, keeping things confidential for them, and facilitating drop-offs and whatnot, which we do, and we facilitate pickups as well.
Okay.
So primarily in Saskatoon right now. But if people are traveling to and fro or through Saskatoon, we'd gladly facilitate a donation drop-off. And throughout 2020, obviously, we've been taking the steps to procure contactless delivery. Yeah. So although we've taken a step back, just the regulations playbook, I guess, of the province, we aren't doing as many pickups to maintain that contactless delivery. So we have people who would like to make a donation, dropping them off at the storage facility, and then we leave them there for a neutralization period of about 2 weeks, and then we take the steps to find the mother who is in need of that particular item. And then also, just to clarify, we don't accept any clothing. We get a lot of questions, hey, can we drop off some clothes too? And we don't do that. We don't accept clothing because there's a lot of so many resources for clothing.
Understandable.
Yeah. And there's no resources for household items anywhere, which was another reason why I created Crystal's Gift too, is because I did thorough research and there's nothing to, like, no resources for these women going through these situations. And it's one of those dark corners in society that was long overdue to be addressed. And I'm hoping to grow it a little bit more, grow the nonprofit a little bit more. Maybe we can start getting donations from, furniture stores that they're clearance items or whatnot.
Understandable.
Yeah, but right now it is homeowners, and personally, I mean, if I was offered the opportunity to give back while I was selling my house, I would love it. And I've gotten great feedback, and many of my sellers have donated, and the processes of the nonprofit have been going very well. And there's also an element, just to make it a little bit more special, we encourage the single mothers to write a thank you note when they receive the furniture. And if the donor wishes to provide their information, we mail it out to the donor. And
that is special.
Yeah, just an added element to make it a little bit more personal. And it is very impactful to these single mothers and their children. So
that's really good. So if somebody in the Saskatoon area wants to donate to gently used furniture or household item, where do they go? How do they get in touch with you? Is there a website? Is there a phone number? How do they get in touch with you?
Being that everybody goes to the internet, well, 99% of the population goes to the internet for everything these days. We obviously have the entirety of our presence online. So you can Google Crystal's Gift and then whatever will populate. But the primary presence right now is a Facebook page. So search on your Facebook account, Crystal's Gift, like us, share it with, a single mother you may think might benefit from it or might need it. And then that's also a communication medium. So if you'd like to make a donation, feel free to message the Facebook page. If you feel, if you're a single mother, you can also message the Facebook page. We do have a landing page on my personal, on my real estate business website. It's under tanyalarose.com/charity. And initially that was the landing page for intake forms. So the single mothers would put in their information and then we'd be in contact with them. However, just a small little bump in the road, a number of them, because when you input your information, you have to wait for an email to come back, and it takes, your needs and, your location and whatnot. We found that a lot of the women weren't filling out that secondary form. So we were sort of left with no contact. So we're actually in the process of removing that and just making Crystal's Gift have its own website. It will be under the domain name crystalsgift.ca, but it won't be up and running till about the spring. So during the interim, the Facebook page would be best to contact, or we get a number of donations from, like, for example, the Crisis Nursery. If they have overflow, sometimes they send items our way, which works out really well because we have the exact same demographic, right? Women in crisis. And their children. And then we keep in touch with, other resources for mothers throughout the city. And it's actually an excellent little network that it's really nice to see the unified effort to help these women who have these struggles, and again, the hope that help will help them elevate their life and improve things for the children involved.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Like if you're able to help them elevate their lives, it's going to elevate the quality of life for them and their kids. And hopefully that just gets passed on to the next generation moving forward. So that's been awesome. So if we want to find you right now, we'll find you on Facebook. And by the springtime, there's going to be a website that's going to be crystalsgift.ca. I'm definitely looking forward to directing people in your area to that website. And I truly want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really, really appreciate your insight. And it seems that we touched on a whole range of different topics. But I mean, that's what happens in a conversation, right? So which is perfect. So thank you so much for your time today. I truly appreciate it. And hopefully when this is ready to go out, you share with all your friends, and they can also have a listen to your experience and everything that you've shared with us today. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
You're welcome. So next week on this on our podcast, we are going to be having a conversation with an ex-football player that's going to bring a perspective about football and getting into business and leadership. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.